topic was concussions, breaking the barrier of the brain. This fall in ISM, I shadowed Dr. Higgs, Matthew Higgs. He earned his Bachelor's of Science at Sulro State University, did his medical school training at Texas Tech, finished out his family residency at John Peters Smith's Hospital, and now works at All American Orthopedics. And my ISM teacher was Mrs. Click. So beginning with my artifacts, at my mentorship site, I was able to collect a few documents and pictures to describe how sports medicine is used within the facility. So we have a few different legal documents here or release forms for patients. We have calendars and different schedules for Dr. Matthew Higgs and his assistants to work around each other and make sure everything is set for the patient to have the most effective treatment. We have different diagrams and pamphlets for Dr. Higgs to communicate more efficiently with patients and help them understand where their injury is and how it's affecting them. And we also have the ultrasound and a knee injection needle or a knee injection syringe, where Dr. Higgs uses to collect different amounts of fluids from the knee and to get a better visual of the knee while he's injecting steroids or other medication. So what is ISM? ISM is Independent Study Mentorship. It's an advanced academic class in which students are able to shadow an adult professional in a career that they're passionate in. The requirements are to document 3 hours of mentorship activities each week. We also have to complete a journal each week given by the teacher and complete an online portfolio, which I'll explain more throughout this PowerPoint, and develop a presentation such as this and a final product such as displayed in front of me. So here's the online portfolio. It's actually on a different link, but this is the home page. It has a picture of me and Dr. Higgs, why I chose sports medicine, and then it has every single activity or assignment that we've ever done in this course, and we can look more into that later. As I said, my topic is concussions. So why did I choose it? It's extremely impactful in my life, being a football player and an athlete. It happens all the time in sports medicine, so that's why I chose it. It's a very hot topic in the medical world today because of all the unknown possibilities within that topic. And of course, it affects people around me as I'm an athlete. My teammates and even some of my family members have experienced concussions, so that's why it's very important to dive deeper into. In this PowerPoint, my key points will be divided into subsections such as causes and effects of concussions, athletic versus non-athletic concussions, solutions and treatments, both modern and maybe new and innovative technology, and the real-world applications and how it affects people today. Beginning with causes and effects, we're going to start with short-term, how it affects the brain. The brain is divided into different subsections, so depending on where the concussion has the most impact, it can affect the brain or the person that experienced the concussion, depending on its location. So as depicted in this diagram, it can affect cognitive thinking, physical ability, emotional capabilities, and sleeping patterns. Moving on to the long-term effects. As depicted in this diagram, each neuron is a way for the brain to send messages and communication throughout the brain. So whenever a concussion is experienced, the axon actually wraps around itself sometimes and creates a sort of death or lack of communication within the brain because it's skipping over those neurons and not having that straightforward communication between different signals in the brain. Long-term effects can also include brain size. So as depicted in this model here, of course, no one could tell that someone has a concussion based on a diagram of the brain, but sometimes it can show that there's a slight decrease in the brain size, or especially in the frontal lobe, where there's the decision-making, problem-solving, and impulse control. So you can usually tell by a person's physical features rather than a diagram of their brain, but it also can be shown through that if it's that severe. A decrease in blood flow in the brain is the same thing. It can affect the messaging between neurons, and affect the frontal lobe as well. And then post-concussion syndrome is just another form of disease, so to speak, of concussions that can affect long-term. So moving on to athletic versus non-athletic, there's not really a big difference in the effects of the brain, but the way that doctors manage these things are a little different. For example, the key terms used in someone that's an athlete and has a concussion are return to play or return to practice. So the doctor is usually trying their best to get this person back on the field or back in their sporty or activity outdoors. So if a person is ready to go, then they will use these key terms and give them that release form, but usually there's not a certain scale or set measurement in which someone is ready to go. So that's why it's a big range between those things. And for non-athletic concussions, some doctors use a scale that's more precise or more general, but it's the same purpose. It has where doctors are using their own scale depending on whether how severe the injury is. So like in this diagram, it shows actually how concussions are being obtained. So it actually shows that 44% of concussions are obtained through falls, which is actually surprising because you would think that in collision sports that's where all concussions are, but actually it's in most people it's in non-athletic activities where concussions are received. And then in the diagram above, it shows the axon terminals being wrapped around themselves as depicted in the slide before. And that's what happens whenever someone experiences a high collision impact to the brain. So some solutions and treatments. Medicine there's not a medical basis for concussions, but some doctors prescribe different swelling type of medication in order to decrease blood flow in those areas. So amitriptyline, gabapentin are just a few examples of how they decrease that excess in the brain. So other solutions and treatments, usually the most common way of treating a concussion is recovery and rest. So different ways of doing that would be plenty of sleep, avoiding drugs and alcohol, of course, that's with anything. Using ice packs again to decrease that swelling and the excess in the brain, and of course using the medication as prescribed above. But moving on to new and innovative technology, some doctors are working on different ways of diagnosing and prescribing medications for concussions. For example, we have an electrode-covered mesh cap that is being developed where doctors put on this mesh cap and it gives a instant imaging of how the brain's activity is at that moment. So this is important because it's a small, compact device in which people can have on the sidelines and at any game, and rather than having to wait to get to a doctor, someone can have that ability or that technology on hand to get that diagnosis right away. We have the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is when a person is put into a chamber and the different concentration of O2 is supposed to change the interaction between different neurons in the brain and help recover from a concussion. And the same type of concept is there for the multi-axis robotically controlled chair, in which the movement is supposed to help recover from concussion-like symptoms. And here are little visuals of those things. We have the mesh cap, we have the hyperbaric chamber, oxygen chamber, and then we have the chair. So in my demonstration, I wanted to demonstrate how a concussion actually works. We have here is the skull, supposed to represent the skull, and your cerebral fluid. And then if we get one of these right here, represent your brain, drop it in real quick, and then put it on. So whenever someone experiences a concussion, pretty much they have a high impact on their skull or somewhere around the brain that causes it to shake really hard within the fluid. So whenever it shakes really hard, as you can see, the brain is impacted greatly. Of course, this is an exaggeration because there's not as much space within the skull, but the brain is definitely impacted from an outside source. So as you can see here, if we put some more cerebral fluid in, the same thing is happening whenever you put on a helmet or some type of protective agent outside the skull, because it's not actually protecting the brain, it's protecting the outside source. So let's see, put this on there. Let's say we put this on there as an acting agent for the helmet. Even whenever you have like a high impact on the outside of the brain, bam, you still have that rattling within the skull. Whenever that happens, of course there's not as much of an impact on the inside of the brain, but you can still see the cracks within your brain. So that's why concussions are very prevalent within sports, even with the headgear and different protective agents that they promote within the sport, because it's not actually protecting the brain from clashing within the skull. Let's see. And moving on to new and innovative ways of diagnosing concussions, the University of Washington in St. Louis actually came up with a way by staining TAU proteins, which are proteins that are supposed to stabilize microtubules within neurons and different parts of the brain, usually found in the brain. So they tested this by, of course, staining these things and then scanning them. So in a non-concussed brain, there was all these blues and light blues, which means that these TAU proteins are perfectly fine, they're healthy, and they're obviously they're prevalent within this non-concussed brain. But whenever they did the same thing in a concussed brain, there was a lack of these healthy TAU proteins, and the red and the greens means that they have degraded. So therefore, that these this lack of stabilization usually leads to those Alzheimer type of symptoms, and as I depicted above, the emotional, cognitive, and sleeping patterns that are out of the norm. CTE is another example of a long-term effect of concussions. If you've ever seen the movie Concussion by where Will Smith is the lead actor, they actually dove deeper into this study, but pretty much it's just a degeneration of the brain, and therefore there's no way of coming back from it. It just gets worse and worse as usually seen in football players because of their constant collision and head injury.